Okay, we're talking with Pete Lapp. Pete is a retired FBI agent, and he is also the author of a brand new book called Queen of Cuba. And this is a very interesting story because it's about a woman who was a spy for a number of years right here in Washington. And she was really, really plugged into the Cuban government. She was arrested eventually. Pete Lapp was involved in that investigation. And this story, I think, is the definitive narrative about this case. And Pete, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us.
Thanks, JJ. Always great to see you.
So, Pete, first of all, tell me, why did you write this book?
I thought that this story had not been fully told, and it was time to really get a fulsome deep dive into the story, not just from the perspective of her, but the perspective of the Cuban intelligence service, and to really try and accent and tell a fulsome account, not just from what happened in here in the United States, but on the other side, the Cuban side of things, and the intelligence officers who cooperated with her and conspired with her to commit espionage against our country. We're at a time when the FBI is under a lot of scrutiny, and unfortunately, it's negative. And I thought that this story is very appropriate, although it's 22 years old now. The story is very appropriate to having a conversation about the Bureau. There's discussion about FISA in the news, and the current new Congress is talking about doing away with FISA. And I'm happy to tell people that without FISA, the Anna Montez story is not being told, and no one is writing a book about it. So there were some things that came up, in current events that I felt the American people needed to have a full accounting of this story to help with the public discourse that's going on today.
Pete, I'm glad you're here to share the story. And I want to make sure that the people who are younger or the people who don't know about this story or people who've forgotten understand just how big a deal this was. So can you just please give us a brief summary of what Ana Montez was doing and why she ended up getting arrested?
So 10 days after 9/11, not an insignificant period of time in our country's history, the FBI arrested Anna Montes for conspiracy to commit espionage. She was passing national defense information from September of 1985. The day she walked into DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, she was a fully recruited agent and went to DIA solely for the purpose of committing espionage. And when we look back into the history of espionage and who's been arrested, we're predominantly thinking about men, and we're predominantly thinking about individuals that start loyal, but then down the road flip and become spies. And in her case, she walked in the door fully recruited, went to DIA solely to provide intelligence to them. For 17 years, nearly 17 years, every day she went to work, she tried to memorize the three most important things that were classified that she felt the Cuban intelligence service needed to know. And that's what she did every day. And despite being a very competent and very accomplished analyst at the DIA, she hated her job because she knew she was only there for the purpose of helping the Cubans, and hated what she was doing on behalf of the U.S. government.
Well, she lived in part for part of her time in a section of Washington called Cleveland Park. And, I've walked by her house many times, and I think this place may now, Peter, may now have become something of a historic landmark because I've seen stories about it. And I did a series of reports several years ago where we featured you in that series talking about what was going on in that house. So how does she communicate with those folks in Cuba?
So they would send her encrypted high frequency messages Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturday nights, 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night on different frequencies. The messages would be in Spanish and would be a woman's voice who would say, "Atención, atención, uno, tres, cuatro, and then she would have to pull out her shortwave radio to listen to these messages and then decide if it was a valid message or an invalid message. And if it was a message of content, she would use Cuban generated decryption software to open and read the message. That was the primary way that they would communicate to her. But the reciprocal part of that is every 2 or 3 weeks, she would meet in person with a Cuban illegal officer, which is a very keen distinction, sit across the table from him, and for 2 or 3 hours have a lunch meeting with an illegal intelligence officer here in the United States, would slide the disk across the table, an encrypted disk that included, at best, high top secret program type information. And then they would have just a general lunch meeting and talk about the state of things. It was really her only emotional intimacy that she had, because the person sitting across the table from her was really the only person in the United States who knew the full Anna Montez and the true Anna Montez. So that was how she received information and how she got information back to Havana.
And Pete, this story, there's so much to the story, but I'm not going to overload folks with all of this now. We're going to come back to you in a little while, maybe after the book is out and everybody realizes what a big deal this is,
Yeah.
and talk to you some more. But there are a few things I want to get straight here now. She was not just some intelligence officer working for DIA. She was a big deal, right?
Well, she was an analyst and an intelligence analyst, and a highly accomplished, highly awarded intelligence analyst. Her unofficial nickname was Queen of Cuba. She was the go-to person on Cuba military and Cuba issues for the U.S. intelligence community. I mean, she had a very good, solid, impressive reputation. The dichotomy of her is the more she did well at work in an environment that she hated, she considered working at DIA torture because she despised what she called the war machine. But the better she was at being an analyst, the more doors that opened for her espionage. So she had to be good in the day job in an effort to really help the Cubans with what she was doing in the night job, so to speak. So that dichotomy, if you will, is quite impressive and interesting.
So she also during this time frame, she managed to do some things that we're just now learning about, some of the things, and it's in your book, that we didn't know about that were taking place, some of the clues and some of the stuff that was never revealed before. So tell us about some of that stuff.
One of the things I want to do with this book is really share with the American people how difficult these mole hunts are. You really are literally looking for a needle in a haystack. Our suspect pool, frankly, was about 1.5 million people.
Wow.
And that is an impressive amount and an incredible amount of potential suspects. Now, very quickly, when you combined some of the other tidbits, and as we put together this matrix, this mosaic of who this person could be, 1.5 million starts to drop off to, okay, now we're focusing on New England to North Carolina, because that's where the high frequency messages would be able to be listened to. We weren't worried about California and Hawaii, but we're talking about a needle in a haystack. And I like to say that looking for agents, moles within, spies, is very similar in terms of looking for serial killers, because you're looking at tidbits and trying to put together a mosaic of who this person could be and then apply it to a population of folks. And the key here is being discreet. You can't put out on all points bulletin to the entire federal government saying, hi, the FBI is looking for this. If anyone would have information about this, please let us know. You have to work very methodically and incredibly discreetly, because the danger is you alert your suspect before you've even identified them. And I think that that's a nuance that a lot of people can't grasp or refuse to grasp. And I think it's a distinction. We're luckier than we are good, quite frankly, at finding spies. And I think that it shows the degree of challenges. And I don't care whether you're the FBI, the CIA, the KGB, the MI5, MI6, or the Cuban Intelligence Service. Every single one of those agencies, both on our side and on the enemy side, have had their own insider threat problems. So it's a phenomenon that's not going away. It's very difficult to find.
Yeah. And, just looking at this particular situation with her and her relationship with Cuba, the time frame, 9/11 was, in that time frame. And you were saying you have to put together this mosaic, find this person. And I imagine that there was a heck of a lot of urgency right around 9/11 to wrap this up or to figure out, what to do in this particular situation. Because I think from looking at some of the literature around your book, the Cubans were asking for details regarding 9/11 and the US's capabilities. Is that right?
They were going to be. We obviously, the arrest prevented that from happening. She hadn't met with an illegal any intelligence officer since well before our investigation started. But we know for a fact the Cubans would have asked her about what we were doing in Afghanistan, and we know from her what she would have done in this hypothetical, because obviously the arrest prevented her from doing that. But hypothetically, she said, if the Cubans asked to give them information about what we were doing in Afghanistan in response to 9/11, she absolutely would have provided that information. And frankly, out of everything that she passed, to me, that's the most damaging. And I know it didn't happen, but that goes to her state of mind and the danger that she put the men and women that we were sending in harm's way in response to 9/11, what she could have done to them. And that's why, one of the reasons I'm so proud of being a part of this investigation is that the collective we prevented that from happening. And I think that's a very strong accomplishment for the U.S. government.
And speaking of the U.S. government and the FBI, some that have written recently about this have been critical of the FBI and what the FBI did in this investigation. And I'm wondering if you and I know, yes, you're a former FBI agent, and I know perhaps what you might say, some might suspect it to be biased, but I know you well enough to know that you're going to tell the truth about this. What are your thoughts about the folks that are criticizing the way this went?
I'm happy to criticize the FBI where deserved. I have an open mind. Yes, I am very pro FBI. I'm very disappointed in the anti-FBI criticism from a lot of different places. Without the Bureau, no one's writing a book about this case, period, full stop. And there was help along the way. DIA provided a tremendous break for us. Absolutely deserve full credit in this accomplishment. And there are other government agencies that deserve credit. I'm not even allowed to say at this point in time. This was absolutely a team effort. This is a we case. But the FBI, it took a long time and way too long to identify her. 17 years is a failure. I'll just be blunt and honest. It's a failure of the security programs and the vetting and the counterintelligence of a lot of different agencies. But you have to understand, we're looking for a needle in a haystack. We've got to be very discreet and careful, because the last thing we want to do is alert, again, the suspect. And that almost happened. And that's a story that has not yet been told. And we were really close to damaging the investigation before we even got started. You have to be incredibly careful. And that's why these cases tend to take a lot longer than, unfortunately, they should. But that's the nature of working these need-to-know cases in a very discreet, methodical way.
I need to ask you very quickly. You said it almost didn't happen. Can you talk about that yet?
Anna Montes got a phone call from someone, and the person got her voicemail. And thank God she got her voicemail, because Ana Montes would have been highly suspicious about this phone call.
Period. That's it.
More to come.
Okay. All right. That said, moving on. Her family. She had two siblings. I think has two siblings that were
Yeah.
colleagues of yours. And had to be this had to be a tremendous burden on them. I'm not sure what they knew or what their how this went, but there had to be some there had to be some serious pain involved in this for her family.
When we think of espionage, we often think about the betrayal of our country, our way of life, our values as a country, the government, whether you voted for the individual who's president or not. We don't often think about the betrayal to one's family. And my heart absolutely breaks for the Montez family. They all are incredibly good, solid people. Mr. and Mrs. Montez raised all four siblings very morally. Mom and dad had their flaws, every parent does, but the decision that Anna made to commit espionage is solely on her. And the damage that she's done to her siblings, the folks that loved her the most, and still do, I'm sure, is really the tragedy of this story. Lucy and Tito, who were FBI employees, and then Joni, Tito's ex-wife, and another individual, loyal, patriotic American FBI employees. Mother and father. Dad worked was a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. These are good people and a good family, and she betrayed the family name and the family trust. And my heart breaks for them. They're entering a new phase with Anna's release tomorrow of what that looks like, the family dynamic looks like, and that's going to be resolved in private as a family. But it's been a difficult time, and let me be clear: no one in the family knew anything about what Anna was doing, and Anna was very adamant that she could not tell them because she knew her siblings would have turned her in. She knew they would have despised what she did. And Lucy has told me directly that she's thankful that the FBI arrested her versus her finding out and having to turn her in. It would have broken her heart. So this is a tough time for the Montez family, and my thoughts are with them as they try to heal and figure out what the new normal looks like.
Yeah. Last thing I'll ask you here is, we talked about Ana Montes a couple years ago, and you talked to me a little bit about what it was like after she was arrested and interacting with her. And if I remember correctly, she was a very shrewd person. And if I remember what you told me about your interactions with her, how would you describe her again?
It was painful. We didn't really like each other. I may come as a surprise, but I think she looked down on me in terms of intellectual accomplishments. I came into the FBI as a street cop out of a town outside of Philadelphia, and I think with her pedigree and a very intelligent woman, we're talking about a very smart, academic, bright woman. I think she looked at me as kind of this knuckle dragging, cop. And intellectually, I couldn't tell the difference at the time between a Sandinista and a Contra, and I didn't care. It didn't really matter to me, frankly. It was about what did you do, why did you do it, and proving the elements of the crime. So, the interaction that I had with her for 7 months, as part of being in the room, debriefing her with Steve McCoy, my partner, and other folks that came in. It was a painful. I am on record of saying the debriefing was much more difficult than the stress of the investigation because of having to interact with her interpersonally, and it was not a fond experience. I don't look back on it. The notoriety wore off pretty quickly, and then the day in and day out became pretty challenging. But we accomplished what we needed to, and she did as well, because she gave us a very full accounting. I don't think the Cubans would be very happy with all the information that she gave us as part of that plea agreement. So,
Yeah. Do they know yet, you think, all of the things that she told you?
I think they know that she sat down with us for 7 months. They know because the government, blessed the cooperation that she gave. So we knew a lot. We knew information that she didn't know we knew, and therefore the validity of what she told us and the fulsomeness of what she told us, in my opinion, was incredibly damaging to the Cuban intelligence service.
His name is Pete Lapp, and the book is called Queen of Cuba. Pete, thank you for taking this time to talk with us. And as you said, there's more to come, right?
There's more to come. There's more to the story that hasn't been told yet.
Well, we look forward to it. Thank you again, Pete.
Thanks, JJ.